Next up, and I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, Lykke, CEO, Richard Olsen. Richard.
Now, to be very honest, I'm very surprised that anyone is still here, because the weather outside is magnificent. It's beautiful to go and have a swim in the lake. And thank you for the invitation to be able to speak. The public, as I've experienced it, and the audience is very varied. I mean, some of you come out of academia, others are really kind of eager entrepreneurs trying to build something, and yet there are others, very few, want to invest some money. And then there are yet other people who, still contemplate what is it all about. What I find absolutely remarkable is when going through the different talks and hear what people say in the hallways, is the huge diversity of views. It's by no means so clear what the future is all about, even though everyone says, I know. So the key thing is that each one of you, some more, some less, have a certain vision of the future. And how can we turn this vision into reality? So I'll tell you what I see. So first of all, I think few of us fully appreciate the extent to which the reality of our society, as we experience it every day, has been shaped and formed by the past. We're here in Zug, and actually the whole history of Switzerland has to do that the kind of princes of Austria, the Habsburger, they tried to conquer Switzerland. And actually they rode through Switzerland, the valleys, and actually the problem was when there is a small lake and you try to ride through with your horses, farmers could just have wooden logs and kind of let them roll down the slope. And obviously they had to dismount, and when they had to dismount, people could go with dagger and make their life harsh. But today, this is why Switzerland is here. This accident of topology, and this is an emergent property, as Tommaso would say. But now, in a much more subtle way, are you aware that all the business processes which we today have are shaped by the fact that a postman physically had to deliver a letter? So, the banks have an infrastructure that assumes that every kind of transaction and its confirmation slip can be brought to the person who had made the transaction, but not with an SMS or WhatsApp message, but by regular old-fashioned mail. So therefore, all the transaction processes have a timeline, which means 2 days. But not just normal 2 days, but actually 2 business days. Now, another thing also, which is an accident of history, is we have to use Swiss francs here in Switzerland, or euro in the European Union, or dollars. But the big thing is that because we're tied to those, we don't have the degree of freedom. So now, why is this so relevant? Because blockchain creates, as we have heard, a kind of global notary service, however we call it. Now, when you think about your dreams of the future, don't think of what blockchain can physically do today. Because whatever you want to build or do will take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and in the meantime, blockchain technology will have evolved a great deal. So I think key, when we think about the future and your vision of how it to be implemented, is that you have to be aware that the underlying blockchain technology is evolving at a rapid pace. And now I think a big mistake which people can do is that they themselves start to think, which solution of blockchain will come in. Sorry to say, the Bitcoin, blockchain, Ethereum, these are prototypes. The real thing is up to come. But now what is going to happen? I argue that literally everything will be tokenized. So if we today have the discussions about Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., some ICOs, no, think that literally every asset, every claim will have a token. So you have a mapping one-to-one of everything of the real life and any contractual obligation to a token. And obviously, you can have different types of blockchains. So actually, the same asset might have different tokens representing that asset. One on Bitcoin blockchain, slightly less likely, one on Ethereum, one on EOS. So there'll be different tokens for the same underlying asset. But now, what is, I think, the big missing gap which we today have? You see exchanges popping up around the world. This is very much similar to when the internet started. You know, every small company said, I'll set up my small internet. I think we lack to there is a lack of understanding. The degree of interconnectedness of our modern society. That, like, if you look at my shirt, it's unbelievable how many currency transactions are involved in just producing a shirt. The cotton, the machines, the kind of buttons. There are so many steps. Completely global. And what happens when you have to kind of move one thing to another in exchange? There is a business transaction. And I think we have to understand that there will not be N separate markets, but actually will envisage and have one global market, just like the internet itself. And I think this is a very important point for all of us to account for. Because if there is one global internet, there'll not be N times that you'll be onboarded. You'll be onboarded once. So there must be huge economies of scale. Now, what is the other decisive change? I mean, we know that in banking, banks play a huge role in modern society. I mean, like 7% of GDP is just the financial industry and the profits which they generate. And at least in Switzerland, every Swiss is really slightly envious of the private bankers because, you know, each one of us would like to be a private banker. But the future is, in my view, that each person, each one of us, has his own smartphone, and his own smartphone is his own personal private bank. So a complete regime change. It's not that you go to a bank, but you're the banker. And what does that mean? For me, if you're the banker, is that you can issue your own token, you can actually get a loan, provide loans, do all your investments. But now, I think something which people are not fully aware of is, do you want to do it in a very complicated fashion? No, it has to be super, super easy. In my view, the world has to be Tinderized. It's all like Tinder. Has to be really seamless. And if it's that way, then people will really start to use it. A key question you might have, okay, this sounds fancy, you know, how personal bank. Why should actually people ever try to take advantage of the bank? What is the unique selling proposition which will actually make the people switch over? In the new digital world of wallets, there is one feature which is quite unique. For example, I have a car. I own a very old car, an old Volvo. But even an old Volvo, if you have it as a digital token, has, because it's soon a kind of historic car, has a kind of market value. Now, of my Volvo, if I value it at 3,000 Swiss francs, the first 500 francs, if I take a loan out on these first 500 francs, is that a risky loan? It is obviously not. So the idea in this digital world is that I can get ultra low-cost loans as if I were a central bank. What we know today is that the people in the street, they all pay huge fees. In the new digital world, no. Each one of us has his private bank and take up a loan, which is, if he doesn't overspend, for the first N% of his assets, gets super low interest rates. So I would argue that this is a key reason why this new technology will spread very fast. So I think what's essential in this new environment is that kind of integration. If you are a user, you don't want to have n different services. Everything should be out of the same kind of look and feel. And the reason is, if that is not the case, it's too confusing. So in this new environment, it's key to have a spotless user experience, which makes things not in n clicks, but 2 clicks. And this necessity to provide a user interface which is incredibly simple, that's not something which comes out easily. So there is one very serious issue in this new world, is that we deal with money. And whenever we deal with money, I mean, you see it in some of people's eyes, you just see a dollar sign. One gets incredibly greedy. It's very hard not to be greedy. And because of that, actually, there'll be, and is, a lot of abuse. So this is why the regulators say, oops, be careful, you're not allowed to do certain things. So for this reason, I think the future is regulation is part of the game. But the question is, how will this old world with certain regulations and the new worlds, how will it kind of merge? The first thing which I find is very important to mention is the new world does not need a change of regulation. Within the existing legal framework, we can do everything that we want. The bad news is it's not exactly cheap and actually time-consuming. So like we at Lykke, just to get FINMA regulated, we've been working on it literally for 1.5 years. I guess we have spent just in straight legal fees, 700,000 Swiss francs, and we get a discount. So, first, the existing regulatory framework can work. But there is a second thing. And the second thing is that this regulatory framework is not really suited for the new world. Just think of all the ICOs. How can you screen those ICOs and make sure that there is no kind of lack of, that the scammers, the pumpers and dumpers are filtered? Now, Airbnb has done a very good job for accommodation. Because if you think about it, when you go and want to rent a room in an off place, it's really not fun if you're kind of robbed when you get there. So the peer review system, which Airbnb has implemented, is incredibly effective. So we have to embrace similar mechanisms to introduce sanity in this new ICO emerging market. Now, how will the regulators start to embrace that? It will be very easy. The company, which is highly successful, has 10 million users, they'll walk into the regulator and say, you know, by the way, we have a large community and we'd like to be regulated. And then what the regulator will say, how do you do business? Please explain it to me. And then how they do business will become the new regulation. So I think there is one point which I find is very, very important, is that we shouldn't map the old world one-to-one into this new world. There is a lot of talk about the legal, kind of legality framework, but there should be a lot more talk about reinventing law and the financial instruments in this new context. So I've said that we have to token assets, token a share. And then, in a sense, I'm sure of you think of, here's the old share certificate, and now I want to have this share certificate on the blockchain. But actually, if you try to do that, then you run into a long list of problems because you try to do this real share certificate, and if you go to the legal text, there is some very specific requirements. I propose let's reinvent. And the reinvention is that we say we don't tokenize the physical share, but we tokenize the right to receive the physical share. And we call the instrument a forward at the run. So it's the right for delivery of a share, and that right can be for delivery in 2 business days, 1 month, 1 year, or 2 years, or by that matter, in 6 hours, or 2 hours, or 1 hour. Now you first say, Richard, is this really a new instrument? Actually, if you think about when you have money at your bank, what do you really have when you have money at the bank? Do you literally own your Swiss francs there? Or is it not a right for delivery of Swiss francs? And if you read the text carefully, it's typically a right to get delivery of Swiss francs in 2 business days. Now, why am I such a fan of the forward at the run? Because that means for any type of token, we can create forwards at the run with different maturities. So we can have a forward at the run for 1 hour, 6 hours, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. And these tokens are standardized in the sense that when we trade them in the market, we have fixed reference points. And they only start to kind of elapse. That is, when you, as a holder of that token, you want to have triggered. Now, I know that if I present this the first time, one doesn't really understand. The key of what I'm interested in is that today we have a yield curve for euros, a yield curve for dollars. Wouldn't it be great to have a yield curve for any type of asset? And for people like yourself, who are economists and people interested in finance, actually, if you have instruments for one asset with different duration, this gives a huge degree of leverage for the person who issues it, because he can do the following. He can issue some for delivery in 2 days, but some for delivery in 1 month, and some delivery for 1 year. And when you have assets which are only deliverable in 1 year, you're free. You can use those assets which you have to deliver for other business, and so you can actively manage your balance sheet. So you become a bank. So forward at the run is the legal mechanics to enable literally every institution or even individual to become his own bank. So now I want to briefly dwell on my personal experience. So my background is kind of the first venture which I did, it was Olsen Associates. We built a real-time information system with using tick data. Out of that, there came a spin-off, which is Oanda, which is a market maker in foreign exchange, which from there I learned that actually the financial system is far more broken than you'd ever guess. And it's there that we introduced in 2001 second-by-second interest rate payments. And that was for me a political statement to reform the capital markets, how they work. And it's unfortunately only in 2011 that I suddenly understood, Bitcoin, it's not about Bitcoin, it's about blockchain. And then finally, in 2015, it was time to really start the project. Because one of the things which I had done wrong in my previous ventures is I was always far too early. And when you're early, it has a big disadvantage. I shouldn't say it too loud, but you get mostly second-rate people. You don't get the really top people. Because many of the top people want to only jump ship when they have certainty of success. And if it's still too early and no one can imagine it, then it's just very hard. So the first 2 years was very exploratory. I knew we were facing a big wave which was coming, but a lot of things were completely unknown. So I had no clue of how the regulatory environment would evolve. Also, we thought Bitcoin, if we're a little intelligent, we can make that scale. So we first started building a semi-decentralized exchange, arguing that off-chain settlement could be the trick to make it really scalable. But we were proven wrong. It's actually, will take quite some time to make it truly scalable. And it's the centralized exchanges that have been the big success. So what we have now done, we have been consolidating, and ready for the real start, because what I find, and maybe some of you share that, is we have seen a big wave and now a consolidation. But actually, we're at the very start. The really exciting wave is to come. So what is the kind of underlying vision of Lykke? The vision of Lykke is obviously, as I explained, I say a big market is evolving. It will be a market across all asset classes. It will be fully regulated. And so obviously at Lykke, we're building that. And we're building that as a fully open source environment. Now, key to that success is to have an awesome user experience. It really has to be really sorry to say, a little bit sexy, and has to be completely smooth. The second very important point is liquidity. It's an issue which we're currently addressing and which will be key for success. So now many of you have your own visions and want to bring that to a success. So how do I think about the current environment? So first of all, I think we have to be very clear. Technology is in a complete flux. The later you can take decisions on an issue, the better. Because if you start too early, like in our case, we started a little early, and our first blockchain which we used was Bitcoin. We should have directly gone to Ethereum, would have been better. So the same thing is, the later you start, in a sense, is better. The second is, I think regulation is there. Trying to just remain out of the legal framework, I think it's not advisable because it will somehow catch up. But what's important to understand is that the big guy will influence regulation. So we shouldn't be so arrogant and say, we have to be kind of orthodox to fulfill the law. We have to be unorthodox, create products that work, that are seamless, that people love. But then be aware that we should use that clout to influence the regulator. As mentioned previously with the forward and the run, let's reinvent law and the financial instruments. Let's come up with things which are truly more efficient and leverage and give us more opportunity. I think a key issue that we all face is we have to build teams. And when you build a team, there is one sorry thing about us human beings, we're just human beings. And, we have egos, we have lack of experience, we kind of boast what we can do. I think there is an important mix of what we have to do is we have to give a high degree of autonomy, trust to the people who contribute, but put them into an environment where each group or individual depends on the other to create cooperation. So combine two orthogonal principles. Then, in early days, you would have to say, just raise money. And everyone knew that you had to go and talk to the VCs or the angel investors. Today, funding is so much more open. So if you get your future users to kind of buy a utility token, which may be regulated as a security, but it's still a utility token, then let's do that. So funding has a much broader sense. And then I think there is another important aspect, I think, which we mostly forget about is, let's be data-driven. Your preconceived idea or my preconceived idea don't count. At the end of the day, it's the user, and try to find objectively what he really thinks. To build a community is key, but to build a community, a key thing is you as a person who builds his business has to follow his North Star, be true to his true values. Don't jump around, be true to yourself. And then something which, even though Roger Federer, the tennis player, is very famous coming out of Switzerland, and actually the Swiss don't really do that, is when you're in business and build a business, play close to the net. Make sure that some of your balls definitely go into the net. And then as a tennis player, don't blink with the eye. Take the setback and do it again. So there is one point which I think far too few people really leverage, and I in my career have definitely not done as well on that side as I should have, is sometimes luck plays in your favor and sometimes bad luck. It's so important to any bad luck, play it and turn that bad luck to your favor. So really kind of take full advantage of all setbacks. And I think that is, one of the most important attributes to make a business a true success. So let's step back and think, where are we today? We're really at the start of a dramatic innovation and dramatic change. And now, because the change will be so huge, have the courage to kind of truly disrupt. And don't build a business that's just so close to the next guy. Because, it's a huge earthquake. Then don't position yourself next to the big building. So, thank you very much. Wish you a nice evening. Thanks.